All right, good morning. It is Tuesday, April 7th, and here is our warm up. So, if the question were regarding Death of a Salesman, which we looked at back in the week of Thanksgiving, but you don't really need to remember that because the whole play, because what we're doing here is just analyzing what someone wrote. If someone asked the question, in a well-written essay, examine the specific characteristics of this drama or play that allow it to appeal to the modern audience. In other words, what specific characteristics of the play make it entertaining for a modern audience? Here is someone's introduction that they wrote. I'm sorry, sentences from the first body paragraph, as far as evidence goes. Willie is unable to stick. Remember, Willie's the main character. Willie is unable to stick with a consistent conception of reality or the truth. He changes interpretations of events as he needs to in order to fit a particular moment. He is self-delusional. In other words, he is lying to himself. He's tricked himself about himself and his family. Then we have 4 questions. Has the writer presented any specific details to illustrate or support the ideas presented? What does the reader expect to follow the first 2 sentences? Does the third sentence follow logically from the preceding 2? Why or why not? And do you consider this to be a successful first body paragraph? So again, not the introduction and thesis. This is a body paragraph with the first sentence here serving as the topic sentence. I'm going to pause this, go ahead and take 5 or 6 minutes and come up with answers to these first 4 questions. And I'll come back and we'll talk about it in just a second. So put it on pause, give yourself about 5 or 6 minutes to think about these 4 answers, jot them down, and then we'll talk about them. Okay, so specific details. If we look at the second sentence, he changes interpretations of events as he needs to in order to fit a particular moment. What I would expect, and then it says he has self-delusion about himself and his family. There's a specific detail might be where he pretends that he has a perfect marriage, despite the fact that he spent all those years having an affair. Another might be that he believes that Biff is a perfect student, but we also know that Biff's grade was so low in a particular class that he lost eligibility to play football. Changing interpretations of events. Well, if your son's failing a class, he's not the perfect student. And if your son came and found you while you're having an affair, you probably don't have a perfect family. Those are the sorts of specific details we would need. So the answer to number 1 would be no. And the answer to number 2 would be specific details like the ones that I presented. Question number 3 asks, does the third sentence follow logically from the preceding 2? Why or why not? So the first 2 sentences read, Willie is unable to stick with a consistent conception of reality or the truth. That's a pretty good topic sentence. He changes interpretations of events as he needs to in order to fit a particular moment. Then it says he is self-delusional about himself and his family. That would not be a bad concluding sentence, the third sentence. But in between, you need evidence and you need commentary connecting those details back to your topic sentence. So it follows logically in the sense that it is a conclusion that you could draw based on the topic sentence. But there's a big gap in between. There's no evidence to support the topic sentence. And so my answer for number 4 would have to be no, because there's no evidence. Next, I'd like to take a look. We looked at this yesterday, but I would like to go down and take a look at the second part. I'm going to put this on pause. I'm going to give you 2 or 3 minutes to go ahead and reread it, refresh your memory on the passage, and then we'll talk about it. Okay, so this passage deals with a description of the Park Lane Hospital for the Dying. Yesterday we talked about the way this is decorated, the mood that we get. We have happily colored hearses. In our own society, hearses tend to be black or white, not red, orange, yellow, green, blue. They're not bright. Although, if you go to some funerals, you'll see caskets that are different colors. You can even get a casket for your college if you want. But hearses generally more subdued. And if you've ever been driving down the road when a funeral procession is coming, then you know that it's generally a somber occasion. We talked, here we have sunshine and yellow paint. So a bright, happy room, kind of like how you might expect a child's nursery to be drawn. Primrose tiles. We talked yesterday about how primrose, walking down the primrose path, is a kind of a metaphor for being naive, assuming the best when the worst is coming. Rose-colored glasses, you don't see the negative. And some of the paradoxes that we talked about yesterday had to do with the fact that this is where people go to die, but it's certainly there's definitely a cheeriness that's forced on everyone. And the key word that we talked about yesterday was synthetic, where we talk about man-made, fake, not organic, not real. And that's kind of reflected here, where it says we try to create an atmosphere somewhere between a first-class hotel and a movie theater. But then who's the atmosphere for? Because if you're lying there dying, it's not really benefiting the people who are going through, as they describe, galloping senility. In other words, they're losing brain power quickly. Kind of the impact of soma causes the brain to break down. So those are some of the things we talked about. Let's move to practice essay number 6, which deals with this passage plus a little bit more from chapter 14. So before we look at the passage, though, let's look at the instructions. In many dystopian novels, the authors criticize conditions in their own society by showing how the future would change for the worse if those conditions do not improve. This is kind of you might say, duh, we've been reading Brave New World the whole time. But remember, in the test, you're going to get a passage from a novel that most likely you haven't read. So read this part because it will give you insight about the passage you're about to discuss. In Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, one of Huxley's themes is criticism of the ways in which governments were pushing the use of technology in the hopes that people would lose emotional contact with one another. Without those emotional connections, people would have no loyalty to anyone other than the government. Consider this passage from chapter 14 in which John, the savage, goes to visit his mother, Linda, in the last minutes of her life. In what ways does the passage reflect this theme of the government working to cut off emotional ties between people? You may want to include such devices of imagery and paradox in your discussion of the overall tone. Remember, may means you don't have to, but you've got clues, imagery and paradox in discussion of the overall tone. And remember, our tone is attitude toward a situation. In a dystopian novel, the overall tone is generally one of criticizing conditions in society. So you see that the question, as it's written, kind of gives you a clue as far as the way to go. I would not, you have 40 minutes to write your essay by hand. I'm asking you to write it by hand because I think many of you are going to end up doing your test that way and taking a picture of it. So we need to get back used to writing by hand for a good amount of time for all this online work we've been doing. After time is up, please go back and label the parts of the outline. See the right column below. Take a clear picture of it and submit it when you turn this assignment in. And this will help you practice for turning in your exam answer. So when we look at the outline, we have introduction. This should look familiar to you by now. Introduction with hook, context, and thesis. Body paragraph number 1, body paragraph number 2. You may go to more body paragraphs if you want, but please follow the same outline if you do more body paragraphs and label them. And then your conclusion, your restated thesis, and your so what. In other words, why is this important? Why is this an important thing for us to talk about? Why is this passage talking about a theme that is significant? And as we've talked about, many times by now, your so what could be a personal story. It could be an opinion that you have about this topic. Pretty much anything goes when it comes to this. So what's my advice to you as far as the body paragraphs? And I've talked about this before. I would not do one about imagery, and then one about paradox. Why? Because the imagery in this passage works to set up paradox. So instead, I would focus on two moments that you think you can write about particularly well with respect to this. Perhaps the description of the room where Linda is. Maybe you could pull text evidence. You could talk about the way they set the room up where the dying live. Another paragraph might be the nurse's interaction with John. I mean, her reaction to the way that, her reaction to him when he says, "She's my mother," that's significant. Because he says, "She's my mother," and she looks at him with startled, horrified eyes. I don't think you can answer this question successfully without talking about that at some point. But given how close we are to the test, that is the most I'm going to do as far as direct clues of what text evidence would I include. Okay, so I think we've walked through the prompt. I'm going to open a live Q&A at 11:50, where you can hope you'll have taken some time to go through it, look through the prompt. You have this material. You have the file uploaded in your Google Classroom account, so you can look at it, scroll around, make note of questions. If you're watching this later in the day, or perhaps even on Wednesday or Thursday, at any time you can send remind questions, and I will answer them. If you're having internet trouble, this is you can send me a remind message, and I can send you a picture of the topic for you to pull up, using your data plan too. So, but I want everybody to have access to this. So, how will this be graded? This will be, we'll use the 6-point rubric as before, 10 points. 10 points for the outline, but you cannot, as far as, 10 points, sorry, I'm not speaking very well. 10 points as far as, do you label the outline? And that's going to be a 10-point bonus if you do. And I will just go ahead and say that you will not be able to get more than a 70 if you do not label your parts this time, because I want everybody to do that. So please go ahead and label your parts as I've put them there in the outline. So I'll see you guys at 11:50 in the Q&A. This is Tuesday, April 7th, and we'll see you then.